Judges Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the best online retailer for Magic the Gathering singles and sealed product, and gatheringmagic.com, your place to explore the game. Now it's time for Judges Corner.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another episode of Judges Corner. Today we're going to be taking a look at Modern Masters 2015, a reprint set which shows a bunch of different cards from Magic's history throughout the modern era. There are a lot of different interactions between different mechanics and abilities, and a couple of cool cards that we thought would be worth covering today, so we're going to examine all of those cards in a single episode. So let's go ahead and begin. Our first reprint is Agony Warp. With Agony Warp, you can target the same creature with both targets, or two separate creatures. If one of the two targets somehow becomes an illegal target, then the other will still be affected by the selected weakening effect of Agony Warp. Speaking of illegal targets, let's look at remand battles. If the spell Remand is trying to counter ends up becoming an illegal target, perhaps because someone else responded with their own remand to their own spell, your remand gets countered by game rules for having no legal targets. This means you will not get to draw a card from your remand. The same ruling applies for repeal. Keep in mind that you can still remand a combust to draw a card, even though a spell can't be countered. That's because the combust is still a legal target, it just can't be countered. While we're on the topic of counterspells, keep in mind that if a player attempts to mana leak your spell, and you pay for it, that doesn't mean your spell is resolved. Perhaps your opponent casts another mana leak after you've paid for the first. Then that means you have to pay another 3 mana, or else your spell gets countered. Our next card is Daybreak Coronet. One of the important things to note about that card is that if all of the other auras attached to the creature fall off of it, then Daybreak Coronet also will fall off of the enchanted creature. Vendilion Clique will be seen a lot at Grand Prix Vegas, but maybe only in spirit. Nevertheless, if you're lucky enough to pull one, don't overlook the fact that you could instead target yourself with the ability, if you really could use something new in your hand. And, if you find your opponent's hand rather non-threatening, don't overlook the ability to just leave everything as it is and not let them draw a card. Sometimes a 3/1 flyer with a peek effect is good enough. While flying through the air, your clique might run into a beautiful tree in the air from a Wings of the Veil's Veil. This might seem a little complex, but it's all rather straightforward. The most important thing to remember is that the power and toughness modifications from earlier or future effects will always apply with the 4/4 setting effect from Wings of the Veil's Veil. An effect like Mirror Entity can still overwrite the 4/4 with something new, or perhaps the Mirror Entity will be overwritten by the spell. It all really relies on which effect is the most recent, because the most recent effect will end up being the only one that applies. So, if a 1/1 elf becomes a 10/10 creature from Mirror Entity, and then gets targeted by Wings of the Veil's Veil, then, once Wings of the Veil's Veil resolves, that elf will become a 4/4 instead of a 10/10. Kavu Primarch has a couple of abilities that pair very well together, and yes, that was probably intentional by R&D. You can pay for the kicker on a creature with Convoke by tapping other creatures. Additionally, you can pay for any increases to the cost, perhaps through a Lodestone Golem, with Convoke by tapping another creature. And those creatures tapped to pay for Convoke ignore Summoning Sickness, because they're not being tapped through a tap symbol ability. Graft is sure to see play, especially with abilities like Proliferate in the set. While grafting a +1/+1 counter onto another creature that just entered the battlefield, the counter is moved upon the resolution of the triggered ability, and only if both creatures are still around when the ability resolves. If the new creature is gone before the counter is moved, then it doesn't move. If the grafter dies before the counter is moved, then they take their counters with them to the grave. Guile is another fatty that will win you games. If you end up countering a spell with Guile in play, instead, you don't. You exile the intended spell that you wanted to counter and instantly cast it for free if you want. Or you can just leave it in exile forever if that makes you happy. But then you'll never be able to cast the spell ever again, since the only opportunity to do so is right when the spell is exiled through this replacement effect. Iona might not see much play in limited formats, but she's still an interesting card, in that she'll prevent monocolored spells and multicolored spells that share a color of Iona's selected color from being cast. Like, if Iona prevents white, then your opponent's Obsidian can't be cast because it's both black and white. This includes hybrid spells too, but not spells that share color identity. So your opponent can cast a Dragon Soul Knight instead of an Obsidian, even though the Knight's color identity includes white. Well, that's it for our episode. If you have any questions about this episode or any other questions in general, you can always send us an email at judgescorner@gatheringmagic.com or leave a comment below, and myself or someone else will be happy to get back to you as soon as possible. If you like the cards and abilities we talked about, or thought that we should have included something that we didn't, go ahead and comment about that as well. We'd love to hear about it and talk about it some more. Until next time, my deepest condolences to those of you who opened Comet Storm, congratulations to those who opened Tarmogoyfs, and have fun.